Guess we can start a tiny bit early with remarks. Welcome everyone to session 3 of the After Hope Future Forms and Alternative Methods Symposium. We're so happy to have you here today. My name is Janet O. I'm the Assistant Curator of Contemporary Art here at the Asian Art Museum. I'm joined by Peter Maitland, sorry, I've said this a lot, over at Cal Poly San Luis Obispo. And joining us are Aziz, Sandev, Promona, and Sophia-Layla. So far, we've heard very enriching presentations about public sites as symbols of hope to defining science fiction. So we've been covering a really impressive range of materials so far. So before handing it off to our moderator, I wanted to just give a brief introduction for a panel, a language where yesterday and tomorrow, was it tomorrow or the same word, call? So we're joined by Aziz Sohail, who is an art curator, writer, and researcher whose work is focused on building interdisciplinary connections and supporting new cultural and pedagogical infrastructures. His current research is a meditation on the longue durée intersections of sexuality and colonialism with migration, law, and identity through the work of practitioners who navigate empire and its afterlives. Promona Sengupta is an artist, activist, academic, and curator. A 2020 to 21 resident at the House of Call Berlin, she is currently a doctoral fellow at the International Research Center, interweaving performance cultures at FU Berlin. She co-founded Mohala along with Jyotidas, sorry if I'm butchering that, KV and Prabhas Tripathi, a pop-up space for progressive art, culture, and politics in Berlin. Sophia-Layla Afsar is a lawyer turned therapist and situation artist based in Karachi, Pakistan. Her work uses humor to highlight trans and neurodivergent perspectives. And Sandev Handy is an artist, curator, and art educator based in Colombo, Sri Lanka. Currently, he serves as assistant curator at the Museum of Modern and Contemporary Art, Sri Lanka, and co-curator for the House of Call Colombo. He is part of an interdisciplinary artist collective, The Packet. And with that, I'd like to hand it off to our moderator.
Hi, everyone. I hope you can hear me fine. I'm just gonna quickly share my screen and hope that it all goes super well in the process. Allah, you gave us a language where yesterday and tomorrow are the same word, kal. These are the beginning lines of the poem by Fatma Asghar that I will continue to read. A spell cast with the entire mouth, back of the throat to teeth. Tomorrow means I might have her forever. Yesterday means I say goodbye again. Kal means they are the same. I know you can bend time. I am merely asking for what is mine. Give me my mother for no other reason than I deserve her. If yesterday and tomorrow are the same, pluck the flower of my mother's body from the soil. Kal means I'm in the crib, eyelashes wet as she looks over me. Kal means I'm on the bed, crawling away from her. My father back from work. Kal means she's dancing at my wedding, not yet come. Kal means she's oiling my hair before the first day of school. Kal means I wake to her strange voice in the kitchen. Kal means she's holding my unborn baby in her arms, helping me pick a name. So I'm so delighted to be here. And thank you so much to Padma Maitland and the Asian Art Museum and the team there, Abby, Janet, Viv, who've been sort of such who've invited us and helped us organize this. With the Many-Headed Hydra, I'm one of the co-curators of this multi-year project, A Language Where Yesterday and Tomorrow Are the Same Word, KAL, along with locally situated collaborators. The name, as you know, takes its inspiration from the poem that I just read of Fatma Asghar and its invocation of the Hindi-Urdu word kal, which considers the past and the future interchangeable and makes it possible to unhinge dominant contours of time or being. Through this two-year project, which is really a platform, we gathered artists and writers from South Asia, its diasporas in post-migrant Europe, and we learned and imagined together practicing vocabularies at the crossings of art, feminisms, queerness, eco-politics, that articulate radically different ways of being alive together in entangled futures, past, and presents. Kal has manifested in the last year and a half in do-it-yourselves radio programs under the title Radio Kal. The Houses of Kal, which have been residency spaces in Berlin, Colombo, and Karachi, a constellation of queer infrastructures for collaborative practices and alternative pedagogies, and 3 publications that are unfolding this next year called Rituals, Fictions, and Traces. In this pandemic time, or this extended pandemic time, or this long pandemic time, because I'm currently dialing here from Berlin, and Germany had the highest number of cases reported, 37,000 that it had throughout the pandemic. And in these ebbs and surges, precarity and uncertainty, we work together collectively across oceans and divided lands to support and build infrastructures for queer and feminist practices in Karachi, Colombo, Berlin, and beyond. Today, we will hear from these 3 folks, Promona Sengupta, Sophia-Layla Afsar, and Sandev, who were just introduced. And they were part of and they are part of the ongoing Kal project in different ways in Berlin, Karachi, and Colombo. I won't take more time up as they are way more articulate and powerful in their expression of the work than I can ever be. So I will just let them take it from here. We know it's a short kind of like quick panel thing. So we're going to try and be really focused, like 10 minutes for each of the presentations or panelists. And then we will open it up to have Q&A or kind of just talk together and chat a bit more. But Premona, take it from here.
Thank you. You can hear me? Yes. Thank you, Aziz. Thank you, everybody who was able to create this panel and host me. I'm very grateful. I'm not going to spend a lot of time pontificating over my work. I'm going to share a little piece, a sound piece, which will come later. But quickly before that, I think I was introduced as many different things, a curator, an activist, etc. But my job description as a person who is a member of the Houses of Kal, I am the resident spaceship captain. So I captain a spaceship called the SS Beben, as you can see. Beben is a fantastic German word. It means quake. Beben, Erdbeben, like earthquake, yeah, shake, quiver. So the reason why this job has fallen onto my small shoulders is because when I started getting involved with the Kal project, it was from a perspective of me as an activist, specifically being really invested in world building and worlding as a political, which is not something that is very that has a lot of political purchase, at least within activist spaces. It is more within artistic, creative spaces. But I have always been very not just invested or interested in a sort of distance way, but in a kind of quite existential way, with sort of having in the front and center of my activist life the idea that other realities are already existing around me, around us, and all we need to do is to kind of find ways of accessing them. I am interested in an existential way to live in an ex-capital, ex-patriarch, ex-hetero space, and I'm not so interested anymore in post-colonial, etc. I'm interested in ex-colonial because it's there, it's here, it's just around the corner, it's somewhere, and we can go there. We can find ways of going there, because the politics is to imagine it and manifest it. So as a manifestation praxis, the Beben kind of comes to us. We created the Beben together. As you can see, I have put the names of everybody in the crew. it is the docking station of the Beben in planet Earth is the House of Karl Berlin. It is obvious because the House of Karl Berlin is a transoceanic space. It centers water, wateriness, buoyancy, our buoyant selves. And I'm sure all of you know, and if you don't, now you know, that on re-entry to planetary atmospheres, anything has to be held by liquid. It cannot stick to ground or surface because it combusts. So water and being held by the ocean and being held through water is precisely the goal of the Beben, because we are indeed looking around for X capital, X's, X straight, X casteist, X poverty spaces, X poverty planets. So that is essentially my little bit about the Beben. I think maybe we can play a little piece that the people who are on board the Beben, we have a crew, and it's curators. They hold many different jobs. They are curators, they are artists, they are activists, they are mothers, they are cooks. So I hold two jobs. I am the captain. My name is Captain Pro, and I'm also the chef. So I cook for my crew as well. And what we do is we have workshops. What you would see, what Earthlings would see, is that we will have these workshops where we come together to create kind of sound pieces or sculptural pieces together, which we show in exhibition sort of setups. However, it is. I mean, those are just the remnants of a process, which is the process of time travel and deep space exploration. That is not something that is so easy to kind of share and show. So we as the Beben, we are not so interested or invested in like visibility or legibility as such. So with that, I think it's fair to just for all of us to take and hear something that one of the crews which is on board, they are called the Joyful Militancy Corps, they made it.
All right. So I will play this. Let me just make sure that it's working.
Yeah.
It was working before.
Should I play it from mine?
Yeah, why don't you just play it from yours and I'll just keep it on.
Okay.
On our hyper-travel back from Andromeda, we hit an unexpected speed bump. The Beben had accidentally fallen into a bumpy wormhole that didn't show up in our map. What could have gone wrong went wrong. It was incredibly hot. We were stewing in our own sweat inside this tin can of a ship. The onboard cooling system broke down completely. The cosmic oceanographers, usually such a genial crew of the closest shipmates, were having frequent domestic disturbances. As a result, the milk they had stored with such great care so far had all turned into yogurt cultures. The heat was making the curd even more acidic. We could taste the joint frustrations of Sumona, Angela, and Kerstin in the off-white sourness. As the captain and the chef of Beben, it was my time to make the proverbial lemonade from lemons. There were enough crew members from what used to be the South Asian subcontinent on Earth for us to be a mostly rice-eating ship. I had been missing South Indian cuisine for a while, and in the wormhole heat, the fridge overflowing with piquant dahi, I realized it was time for curd rice. Here is my recipe, a bastardized take on the South Indian blockbuster dish, cooked on board a spaceship hovering light years away from humanity. Chop one big red onion and one big tomato finely. Take stock of one big cup of curd and 1.5 cups of boiled leftover rice. Set aside 3 dried red chilies, 7 to 8 whole black peppercorn kernels, half a teaspoon of black mustard seeds, half a teaspoon of fenugreek seeds, and a clutch of dried curry leaves. Turn on the heat under a frying pan. Add 1 tablespoon of cooking oil of your choice. Add the dried spices and let the mustards splutter. Enjoy the fantastic smell till the fenugreek turns reddish. Add chopped onions and tomatoes. Cook them down. Add salt and sugar to taste. Add turmeric powder. Once the base becomes goopy and starts releasing oil, add the rice. Break down the clumps and gently coat the grains in the base. Lower the heat and add gently whisked curd. Mix vigorously to bring the dish together. Serve hot or cold. Needless to say, intergalactic travel on Tair Sadam is much smoother. The curd helped us cool down, our bellies were settled, and the oceanographers seemed to have sorted out their disagreements. Another day in space, I guess.
Yeah. So thank you for listening in. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you followed the recipe.
Thank you so much, Promona. And I just want to say that this project has been so powerful, and I've been thinking of it also, like we in our discussions, thinking of it in the context that we are, even though we're all situated in different time zones across the world, we're kind of being hosted by an institution in California, specifically the Bay Area, which is the site of empire in terms of technology, wealth, capitalist extraction. I mean, we all know about Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos up in Washington, and Facebook and Meta, which has just been announced. And when these men really, or patriarchs, white men, white straight men, I think all of them are, hopefully they're all straight. But the thing is, when they imagine these worlds in which they will rule and they will go to space, and when we are dying and we're ending as a human species because of them, SS Babin for me offers that space about what can a queer, feminist, brown, non-white way of imagining another world looks like, and what speculations can we have. And of course, thinking of that in this context of after hope, I think is really important. And thanks so much, Promona, for that. Sophia-Layla, shall I invite you in now? And Sophia-Layla was one of our residents in the House of Karachi. So you will hear a bit of her practice and a vignette of sort of what she was working on this summer in Karachi, which is, yeah, well, I will let you introduce that, Sophia.
Thanks, Aziz. Hope you can hear me okay. I made this little makeshift wind cover today so that you couldn't hear the fan. So what we've been working on over the summer, just to give you a little bit of background, my entryway into the world of art was through resistance, through activism. I'm a trans woman, my pronouns are she, they, and over the past couple of years, I've been doing quite a lot of organizing around the trans community, which is quite fractured in Pakistan. And I've titled this New Indigenous Resistance Intention with Pride, because a lot of the times the lens that the indigenous resistance takes is in opposition to how pride is conceptualized in the West. Because this is saying that that's not us. What we are is something much older, much more indigenous, much more spiritual, etc. And I've got a little bit of a vignette of a protest we held last month outside Karachi Press Club. Now, Karachi is a coastal city which is the largest city in Pakistan, and it is a commercial hub. So it's often the center of a lot of activism, particularly because of its large population. And what you can see over here is you can see a contrast of people using sort of Western slogans such as trans rights are human rights and a little bit of some colored rainbow situation. But then in the middle, you also have very traditional spiritual symbols. On the top left of the middle image, you can see is the alam, which is a very holy symbol in Shia Islam, which has been used for centuries by the community as a spiritual marker. And in the final one on the right, you can see that through the House of Kal, when we were doing our open house, we actually created a whole bunch of leaflets with 11 names of trans women who were killed this year. Unfortunately, that number has now gone up. In this slide, you can see how protest has become a lot more uniquely Pakistani and indigenous and taken on a religious flavor as well. So here you can see pictures of trans women mostly dancing to the dhamal, which is an ancient genre of song and dance, which is honoring Sufi saints. Now, Sufi saints are seen as interceders with God, and they are often called upon for all sorts of things, such as food, water, shelter, wisdom, etc. And what this stands in contrast to, this was a bit of a watershed moment in trans activism in Pakistan, because what has changed is previously there was this misery narrative where there was an appeal to charity, and the community would often approach organizations, individuals, and say, look, we're very poor, we don't have jobs, we're discriminated against heavily, please give us some money so we can eat. But what happened here is there was a lot more ownership, and there was a lot more looking outwards rather than hiding away in terms of our own culture and our own narratives. And there was a lot more sharing of what is happening on the inside, something that has, of course, brought a lot of tensions within the community as well. On the bottom right, you can see that we did these armbands at the House of Kal open house, which are the names of the 11 women at that time. There is one name which is not there because that happened after that woman was murdered very recently. Aziz, can we have the next slide? Aziz?
Yeah, it's there. No?
There we go.
Yeah.
Okay. So this is a poem which I wrote in Urdu, which is the native language, one of the national languages of Pakistan. And it talks about how Kal is both yesterday and tomorrow. And I'm just going to recite this for you. Kal roz aata hai aur jata bhi hai. Waqt ka haath thama nahi jata. Aaj main aurat hu. कल में मैं अपनी जनानगी ढूंढ रही हूँ. कल की परेशानियां आज गोद लेता है. परसों की ख्याली पुलाव की लज्जत में आज भूल ही जाते हैं. जब वक्त की लहरों में सुकून ना मिले, आज का साहिल भी गायब हो जाता है. जब कल का सहारा ना मिले, आज की तन्हाइयां में आशियां कहाँ ढूंढूं. आज मैं औरत हूँ. हम अपनी कहानियां कल की बुनियाद पे लिखते हैं. आज तो चला जाता है. मेरी तब्दीली भी कल में बसी है. आज मैं औरत हूँ. जब वक्त भटकते हुए उलझ जाता है, आज़ादी कैदगी क्यों लगती है. मेरा इख्तियार पड़ोस से ललकारता है. मेरी खुद मुख्तारी की झूठे ऐलान दूसरों से उगलते हैं. ये बाजी तुम्हारे साथ नहीं खेल रही हूँ मेरी जान. ये मुकाबला नहीं है मेरी जान. तुम कल की चिरचिराहट में गुम ही रहो. आज मैं औरत हूँ. Now, this is one of the props that I used in the open house in Karachi. Now, this is critiquing cis privilege, and one of the forms of that I learned quite quickly at while being in the art space and trying to perform activism was that humor was a great way of disarming individuals, people you're critiquing. And what I did here is we have a giant roll of bubble wrap, and this is I've taken some tape and written with lipstick, handled with care cis feminists, and I've added a little fragile sticker below that as a way of showing cis fragility, essentially, how when we try to fit ourselves into activist spaces which focus on gender, women's spaces, essentially, we're not received with wholehearted warmth or support, and that frustration was being expressed here, without actually saying what exactly it is that warmth lacked. What kind of warmth was lacking? But I think this was a nice little visual metaphor that I like to use. And then if you go to the next one, this is a combination of humor, opacity, and holding up a mirror to cis folks. So if you work backwards from the protest that I was showing earlier, these are the things that lead up to that protest. And what I'm trying to show is how there is a combination of different mediums that we're using as a way of holding up a mirror to cis folks. So there's some opacity. You can see on the large image on the right that there are certain things that are hidden away. And what these people who are looking at is also something that's obscured. So even though it's behind the curtain, they were hoping to see something, but that expectation was also subverted. I'd set up an expectation by having little arrows pointing to the inside, and then there's a literal mirror, as well as a little tongue-in-cheek joke, which is "I'm sorry, you're cis. Get well soon." Just as a way of recentering the narrative around trans people. If we go to the next slide, over here, one of the props that I used was my pre-transition clothing. And what I didn't want to do was talk about how miserable pre-transition was and how upset it made me to wear the masculine clothes that I had to wear because they were part of my assigned gender. And so what I have here is an artist friend of mine who visited the gallery and decided to take all my ties and and dance around in circles. And I think that was a really beautiful metaphor for how stories can be changed, how narratives can be tangled, and new narratives can be created out of things, as a way of bringing joy as resistance. If we go to the next slide. There is a little poem here that I wrote. Unfortunately, I don't think I have enough time to read it. And this is just out of frustration of how hope is fading with our lives, where cis feminists are saying things like, "I'm sorry, I couldn't come to your protest. I really wanted to come. I'll be there in spirit." But then they're also saying things like, "Stop alienating our lives. Have you thought about us?" And if we go into the final slide, these are the same individuals that you saw on the first slide. These are my friends, my colleagues. These are all trans women who I've worked with very intimately, both in the capacity as a counselor in an NGO, but also as an activist and also as an artist. And the community has its own traditions. I've sort of paid homage to a couple of them on the right. There's our secret language, which I've obscured in a little bit. You can see the words just about, but you don't know what they mean because you won't find them in any dictionary. And then there is also a harking back to traditional charity-based activism, which I have brought into the gallery as using respectability, turning respectability on its head as a form of resistance. And that's me.
Thank you so much, Sophia-Layla. That was so powerful. And I just want to say that, I mean, this protest that kind of just working through kind of joy and community and collectivity and humor has been such a powerful experience to witness, but also kind of still, Sophia-Layla actually held space in the session in Karachi House of Kal for trans and queer grief, which was, again, she said that by then 11 trans folks had been reported killed in Pakistan. Now it's 12, and this is reported. We don't actually know the actual number. We know it's going to be way, way, way more than 12, of course, even if we say that 1/10 reported. And even amongst joy and humor, we have also space to grieve and to be together because our communities are struggling. And I think seeing both that joy and that grief come together, even at this large protest, which was, I think, a ground, like I've never seen a protest like that in Pakistan, at least centering trans community and kind of bringing them together, I think was so powerful. And hopefully it will lead to some real shifts. And it is, I think, already leading to some. Well, you're there, I'm not right now, so I don't want to say that. But I also just wanted to quickly say that one person already asked in the Q&A, what is the translation of the poem Sophia-Layla wrote? And there is no translation because part of our politics and as Sophia-Layla's politics are that we work with opacity. And so, you know, the whole world is access to the world in English, where the communities and peoples and lives live in multiple ways all over the world, as we know, in multiple languages. And I guess this is a form of us also trying to kind of take back some of that. So if you can speak Urdu, you'll know the poem. And if you can't, then you don't. And I think that's also okay in the world as well. But having said that, I will bring in the final person from Colombo. And it's quite late, both in Karachi and in Colombo. It's like 10:30 p.m. there now, or 11 p.m. in Colombo, almost midnight. So thank you so much for being with us so late, both of you all, and kind of having your energy up. So Sandev was the curator of the House of Kal Colombo. As we said, there were 3 residency spaces happening simultaneously, one in Berlin, one in Karachi, and one in Colombo, under this thing called the House of Kal. And Colombo really took place under deep pandemic surge because it was really facing a lockdown for the last 4 months. And within that, Sandev was curating this residency, and I will let him kind of take it from here.
Thanks, Aziz, and thanks, folks, for having all of us and having me here. It's exciting. Yes, as I'm just going to navigate to my screen. Can you folks see this? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, just I think as Aziz was saying, you know, we had a multiple series of kind of lockdowns, and the House of Kal started in Colombo, at least started at the beginning or the end of one of the lockdowns, and then, you know, smacked right into another really big lockdown. So I'm I guess going to speak a little bit about what that experience is like, and what care look like in this context. So this is the most amount of text that I will have on any of the slides, as all the other slides are images. But I'm just going to jump right into it. And it's just, this is, as Aziz mentioned, you know, there were 3 sort of simultaneous houses. One in Colombo, one in Berlin, and the other in Karachi. So let me just jump straight into it. All right. The House of Kal Colombo was in many ways an exercise of hoping in hope, or hope that is in constant failure. It was conceived as a space that would have brought together practitioners permanently or temporarily based in Colombo, whose work explored feminist, anti-fascist, anti-racist, and queer possibilities. The House of Kal Colombo was imagined as a low residency program, together with a public programming and publishing outlet, within which inhabitants would have engaged in sharing, contributing, and contributing to a collective and self-organized space in the making. It aimed to be an experiment in co-creating local spaces and infrastructures of support. The Houses of Kal attempted to summon a multiplicity of approaches to learning, sharing, healing, and co-living as a collaborative practice between emerging artists and transdisciplinary practitioners, and aimed to foster community and solidarity locally and across borders. I use words like was, would have, imagined, hoped, aimed, and attempted, notably in their past tense, and intentionally I've left them incomplete. 2 weeks now after the House of Kal Colombo has closed, I use these words without any closure. And when I do this, I do not mean to conclude it as a series of failures. I do not mean to suggest that we merely attempted and aimed and hoped and imagined. I'm trying to use these words without closure so I can find another space between success and failure. And in that, find a hope that is always insufficient and always failing, but still crawling and slithering little by little, not forward or backward, but a hope that is not clean, that is not pure. I'm interested in a hope that is perhaps grimy. The House of Karl placed an emphasis on collaboration and care for each other's practice. I asked myself, looking back, what did we imagine this care to look like? And that care, I think, looked like setting up workshops, a printmaking workshop being one of them, where we explored what it meant to make prints and multiples urgently when something needed to be said. This care would have looked like creating spaces in which we would have been in consistent conversation about the work that sat in our bodies and that we held close, in the hope that we would find ways to hold them close together. Care might have looked like finding safety in sociality and in a space together. Care might have looked like sharing meals or cooking them, or the small conversations that might happen in the spaces between cooking and cleaning as you go. A kitchen under commons of sorts. Or it might have looked like working together in a beautiful space that was both green and charming and messy and charming. Care might have looked like looking at the ocean and walking along the beach and thinking together about what it means to loiter here and to find small lessons of resistance from the coast, or to look at the city and its changes and its beautification and the silence that comes with it when the people that city belongs to have been erased, and to look at the metal and the concrete and the flags that have done this erasing. Care might have looked like walking and searching in the wetlands for mythologies and traces of development projects that are mythologies in and of themselves. It can look like traveling the underbelly of the city and trying to make sense of what you saw there at a fancy cafe later. What happens when you make yourself unidentifiable and take a break by sitting down amongst tall walls that look back at you? What happens when you're questioned by a policeman on your right to sit, and questioned as to what you are, and questioned as to what you are when you are sitting here? Care can look like a meeting right after, where you try to find the words together to respond back to this policeman who is long gone. You can show care when you notice the way the state chooses to remember and create and flaunt its own archive. You can care when you vandalize this archive and declare your love on it. You can care by rewriting, by editing, or by exposing the state archive as a perfect place to store empty bottles of liquor. You can care when you notice a palm tree the state planted after raising buildings from the ground that once housed whole communities. And you find a papaya plant that fights and grows despite the shrub of the state, as it does in most households on this island, still growing, still fighting. You can find ways of caring by learning about the water hyacinth and how it is an invasive species, but more importantly, how the state has spent centuries in various forms of bureaucracies to try and curb its spread, and how it employed men over generations to clean it up, and how these men over generations have purposefully done an incomplete job so that the generations to come will continue to be paid for their labor, to repeat this beautiful cycle of resistance and sustenance. What I'm showing you right through is a lot of the programs that we kind of went through or were able to at least do in the in-between phases of the House of Karl when things were opened up. And these are a lot of shots and references from some of the field visits that we were doing. I have this image in here because I just found it on Google and I thought it was very funny, of a studio space. Care can look like creating studio spaces, and the Karl House in Karlombo and in all three, one of the big components of it is that we'd bring together or create studio spaces for residents to work and collaborate and sort of cohabitate together. So 5 in total for each resident for the House of Kal to use and work together in, and to have very serious, important conversations about their art and to feel comfortable in. Kya can look like when the pandemic joins the group of monsters already placing its weight on you. Caring can look like when the view of your neighborhood becomes your studio, or your writing desk, or your mother's dining table, or the space between the washing machines and the fridge, or underneath your writing desk, or your childhood bed. The pandemic meant that utopic shared studio spaces were not possible. So you switch to Zoom. At the beginning, you all have your cameras on, and slowly they turn off because you've run out of data, or your connection is bad, or you're just tired. And don't feel smug anymore about how quickly you've innovated during the pandemic to make art. Caring for each other's work during a pandemic can mean that you learn how to do it sonically. Caring for each other's work during the pandemic meant that our work could only be shared in pixels. Ironically enough, this work here cannot be picked up, as the moment you pick it up, it would crumble. So in many ways, sharing pixels was the only way to see this work. But caring for each other's work during a pandemic meant that you WhatsApp your progress and that it falls flat every time. It does not compute and does not capture. It meant that as a curatorial team, what you had hoped would be hours of long conversations and a tea in between, exploring and thinking together for your studio visits, becomes scheduled into 1 hour back-to-back slots on a calendar. Caring for each other, others' work in a pandemic might also mean not making work and taking the time to rest and to specifically decide not to make, and taking the time to disengage and not theorize, and taking the time to feel tired. Caring for work as a curator in this case meant simply saying, yes, take your breath, take your time. I'll check in to see how you are and say nothing about your work. It can also mean dealing with thousands of people dying around you that you barely have the time to mourn. A studio visit in this situation might mean the opposite, is that for a few months, you don't have any studio visits, that you have check-ins with each other and ask how you can be there. The work can wait and the art doesn't need to happen. And when a close friend or family member falls sick or passes, and you want to make art about it for the program, because you haven't made any other art all this time, you find a way to encourage each other, not to theorize loss, and to hold it close. Caring for each other in the pandemic might mean spending hours on end stitching together over video chat and sharing the stories that come to you. Caring for each other's work in a pandemic might mean that a few of your housemates help you cast your whole body as part of your work while the other housemate cleans in the background. It might mean that you've gone over to a co-participant's house and you work on spontaneous performances Instagram Live. And everyone tunes in, and then sometimes no one does. It means not having the energy to make new work, so you turn back into your own archives from a time when you had more energy and search through it for yourself. Caring during a pandemic might mean that this is the first time in months you are seeing each other in person and only just managed to catch 30 minutes to sit down and say hi. This is when we, at the end, had an open studio, an open house of the project. And it was the first time we'd all actually met each other in months. After setting up for an open house and open studio that is supposed to showcase what you've been working on for the past few months, while it is the first time everybody else gets to see what has been close to you all these months, and that slowly you find yourself amongst friends. Caring for each other's work during a pandemic might mean that you want to make space for others to speak and for you to listen, or that the casts your housemates helped you make many months before become altars for rituals and meditations on bodies that change and disappear. Or that you make space for others to join in on the many hours you spend stitching and talking together. And what was supposed to be an hour and a half long stitching circle stretches past 3 hours. It can mean that you finally find the words to all the changes in your body. You document it in isolation and in silence, and that people want to hear more, and that some others share your joy in these words. It can mean that you find ways to speak about those close to you and search for the ways in which they resisted through their life and to document how you chose to remember them. It means that between the performances and the Q&As and the film screenings, there are moments between artists, visitors, and friends that are not archived, not documented, and not showcased, where the most important conversations take place, in a living room, on a couch, around a table, and under comments that emerges between all the artwork king. Care fails and yet continues to crawl for when you clean spaces and make space for each other, and when you occupy spaces with others. But care can also come in isolation, or when your parents board up the entrance to your home to protect your family from all the loss that surrounds you. Care that formed in a pandemic is a failed care, as care often is. That is, that's what I have. But that was just kind of something I had written to reflect and think about what it means to really think about this kind of failed sense of care, that it's ongoing care or hope is an ongoing failure.
Thank you so much, Sandev. I know that we are towards the end. I think we have about 5 minutes left maximum, if I'm not wrong. And I had some things that I wanted to say, but I actually won't, because I just feel like the three kind of presentations and speaks, like in the performance lectures, are sort of listening with, I think, so powerful in of themselves. And I think it really reveals to you sort of the manifestation of all that has been happening, and how then we think of it through this idea of hope and after hope, and what worlds are going to be imagined. There's a few Q&A things, but I also, so I will just read out the questions that have been there that I just would like sort of folks to kind of quickly respond to. So, is there a yoni connection to Babin? Reminds me of Thor, a radical feminist escapist paradise. This is from Bhagirat, Promona. Then for Sophia-Layla, there's a question about, apart from humor, what else do you like to use to disarm the viewer of your work? What other mediums of art are more conducive to expressing your experience with cis fragility? And how have cis people reacted to seeing trans joy as a part of your work? So these were the questions that were there.
Should I just quickly respond to the question?
Yes. Yes.
I mean, it's the connection to the uni is not even tenuous. If you saw the logo in the middle, there is a, how do you call it? Like a oyster. I mean, it looks like a yoni. So, I mean, the word yoni has a particular kind of, philosophical tradition and, a scriptural tradition, religious, often spiritual. But as somebody who has a yoni, none of that matters to me, and all of us on the Babin have big time yonis, so we very much are connected to the yoni. But I didn't understand the second part of the question, but I think that's
Thor, a radical, yeah. I've never seen Thor actually, but Thor, a radical feminist escapist.
Or like the movie.
Or that person, right?
Okay, I'm out of my depth with this one. Sorry.
Sophia-Layla, do you want to go for it? I think it was more about sort of, yeah.
Sure. I mean, that's a really detailed question. I'm going to sort of just very surface touch on what it does. And these are very, very valid questions that I spent a lot of time sort of grappling with. One of the things I will say is part of the practice that I've fallen into, and I call it situation art. Of course, that's not a term I coined, but that I decided to use that as a medium because it is much more interactive. And what I found is when we're having conversations about power and privilege, they need to be real-time conversations, because what ends up happening particularly is even disarming fragility is very fragile. there's an element of people getting very, very upset. So it almost feels like mollifying people a lot of the times, saying that, okay, well, I critiqued how your space is, or how people with your privileged identity live or treat people like me, but I'm going to take care of you. So what ends up happening is, despite the humor, there is also a large element of care that has to be there in order to have that conversation. And you can see that with people who talk about all sorts of marginalizations. For example, I'm thinking about Uncomfortable Conversations with a Black Man, which is a fantastic YouTube channel. It's now a book, in which there's a Black man in America who's talking about race. And these are uncomfortable conversations in which he is essentially providing care to people who have often been, who have been quite violent. The people who represent violence, for example, police, they might not have been violent themselves. So a lot of that, I think there has to be an element of care, and that is why there is an element of fragility, because while I am providing care, it is also perpetuating a hierarchy, but at the same time, it is also doing. I also have to care for myself. So when I'm providing care for myself as a way of managing care for others, that's where joy comes in, because without joy, care can't be performed. But I have so much to talk about this. Unfortunately, there's very little time.
Thank you so much, Sophia-Layla. Again, I know that this was a super short kind of time sync, so I think we really tried to cover as much as possible and give these glimpses. If there's no other final questions or kind of conversations, again, I don't want to take up more space because I also know there's like a continuous loop, but Cull will continue and does continue online. The Radio Cull will manifest over the coming year. There will be the publications coming out and I guess further manifestations in all beautiful ways. And thank you so much for hosting us here to kind of, sort of sharing and kind of bringing across divided lands, and oceans and spaces. I mean, folks who are here from South Asia and really, I think, understand what it means to kind of somehow be and identify South Asian in these kind of ways in times when we're deeply kind of ruptured with each other. So thanks for allowing us to bring this together, especially from a space of queer and feminist practice. And I guess that is our response to After Hope as a group. So I will let Janet, right, and Padma take it from here.
Thank you for those incredible presentations, really powerful, moving, and inspiring. And I love the way that they kind of charted between care, joy, and kind of adventures even into space, right? As parts and aspects of hope. So thank you all for your thoughtful and really moving responses and presentations. I think next we're going to take a small break and then begin the next session, Take Action. But thank you again to our fantastic presentators. A really wonderful session.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Have a lovely day.
We'll resume at 11. Thank you all.